Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, 2018, son.
I know, it's 2018. Thanks for joining us again on this show this week. My name is Samantha and Remoy.
Yo, my name is Remoy George Philip I.
And this is Masculinities. So listen, everybody, welcome back. The holidays were awesome. And I'm just happy to be back in this
awesome for some who are in Hawaii, but that's fine.
Hawaii, you guys, if you haven't been to Honolulu, I just need you to do what you got to do to get there. It's amazing.
Why doesn't everybody spend their Christmas on Hawaii? Why don't they?
I mean, I don't know what I've been doing up until now. But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, Hawaii was amazing. Life was amazing. Remoy, how have you been? How was your winter galore?
How have I been?
Sense. Yes.
Well, I wasn't in Hawaii. I was in New York City where it was frozen, and I was angrily frozen. And yo, for all you fucking New Yorkers out there who say this is normal and that was everyday kind of winter cold bullshit, I got a fucking spreadsheet that says otherwise. It was colder than cold, and that's what I did.
Well, I was checking temperatures while I was in California and Hawaii, and I was like,
why don't you say
damn.
Hawaii one more time?
I mean, you know, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, yeah, I mean, I was like, I got to get my bicoastal plan together. I can't be doing this.
Ooh, I can't wait to be bicoastal.
Yeah, that's what I was like. I got to see what I'm going to do, whatever. But, you know, all in all, honestly, it's really nice to be back in New York. As soon as I got back, you know, I was like taking my luggage into like the elevator or whatever, and the elevator smelled like pee. I felt like I was back home. So, yeah, besides that, not enough basketball. I did my usual NBA Christmas, and then I was really sick, so I didn't really get to do a whole lot.
Yo, Steph Curry, we need your ankles to be better, man, because basketball is just a lot more fun to watch, even though it's been a good season for everybody. We need Steph Curry's ankles to be just healthy and well.
I know. I mean, I do need to be watching a lot of basketball. But here's the thing, though. I think a lot of people are still hating on Kyrie, and I just want to come out in the forefront and say that I'm happy with Kyrie. You know what I'm saying? I'm happy with what...
So you're a flat earther, too, is what you're saying.
I'm a what?
You're a flat earther.
What does that mean? I don't even know what that... Oh my God, because he said... No, Kyrie,
it's
you
on his shoes now.
You gotta stop
it's on his shoes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, see, this is what happens when you start to root for someone, and then they do stuff like this, and you're just like, but why? Anyway... one thing that happened, though, is that on the plane, I did see a movie called Wilson with Woody Harrelson.
Oh, that's with the angry dad?
Yeah, it's... Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's dark as shit.
Dude, but it's so good. Actually, I feel like it has a lot to do with kind of like the things that we're talking about here. And I mean, it was interesting because like reading, you know, Angry White Men by Dr. Michael Kimmel, who will be here in a minute, like at the same time as like watching this, it was actually very illuminating because I did feel like a little bit of, he just wanted human connection, right? And it was like impossible for him to get that until he went, oh, spoiler alert, until he went to prison, you know? And so I just thought that it was really interesting. If you guys haven't seen it, watch it and then listen to our show. Wink, wink.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue.
Yes.
Because today is a special episode, especially for Samantha, because she's giddy right now.
I'm pretty juiced.
It's the new year, right? But it's also the first episode of Masculinity in 2018.
That's right.
And we are grateful to be here to just really have this conversation about how we got to such a gendered space and a gendered country and a gendered civilization as a whole, it feels like. Yeah. But most importantly, we're here to uncover the impact on men living in a male-dominated society and how expectations and privilege devolve into really an unfavorable situation for all of us. This is really about kind of exposing the system for what it is, painting a picture of what systematic patriarchy looks like, because it's looking like it's not all that beneficial to men at all. It's also about exposing those kind of norms that we abide by day after day and empowering ourselves and each other to do, you know, something about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that we're very invested in, and it's one of the main reasons we're choosing to have this conversation through a podcast rather than some other platform, is really having these conversations about men and masculinity be accessible. These days, we've had the opportunity to blow the lid off in terms of sexual harassment with the Harvey Weinsteins and the Chuck Closes and the Matt Lauers.
He had a button on his desk, right?
What?
He had a button on his desk to lock the door and like keep people in there, particularly like women. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. We don't have to.
Fuck. What? Okay. I'm sorry. Let me just bring myself back. Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing that bit of really disturbing news. That's crazy. Okay. And so Matt Lauer's button under this. Okay, great. There's still this understanding that this dynamic is only attributed to super powerful guys who will have things like having buttons on their desks to lock people in offices. Okay. And that regular dudes aren't really in a position to display such behavior. And I feel like that really undermines the pervasiveness of some of the system.
And you're right, because a lot of times we kind of project and say, "Oh, this is everybody else's problem.
Right.
This is
Yeah.
the people who are in power. These are whether it's the politicians or the celebrities or the bankers, just the men who have the power. They're the evil ones, right?"
Yeah.
But what we need to be looking at here is talk about how to have conversations with all of us, everyday people, men, women, trans, children, young adults, all of us, and how to focus on these incidents, how they're not just a result of men in ultimate power, but really how it's inherently taught by our educational systems and our social systems, and how we interact with the TV and ourselves, how we have our conversations. With that focus, we can get into how to have these conversations about gender with people who simply haven't thought about it before and just may not see it. So with that in mind, we have a very special guest today that Samantha is very excited about.
I'm super excited, guys. It's very excited for me because I remember reading the New York Times article about the master's degree from the Center of Men and Masculinities at Stony Brook University, and that article was actually written in 2015, but it wasn't really until I went and started looking for answers, after the whole Brock Turner fiasco, that I found it, and I really felt like what was being talked about in the article about what it means to be a real man versus what it means to be a good man, and all of that really kind of echoed some of the things that I had been subconsciously been thinking about. So it's really an honor and privilege to have Dr. Kimmel here today to help us navigate how to talk about masculinity. Dr. Michael Kimmel is a renowned sociologist and the founder of the Center for the Study of Men and Masculinities at Stony Brook University, and has written a plethora of books on topics related to men and masculinities, including Manhood in America, Guyland, Angry White Men, which we just both finished. And you've spoken at conferences all over the world and been an expert panelist discussing gender in terms of everything from politics to marketing. And so we're really thrilled to have you here today. Your TED Talk about how gender equality is good for everyone was a big determinant factor for me having the idea to start the podcast. So thank you for being here. Yep.
Before we go any further, so everybody can know, so you've done incredible work. You're a professor, and you are over at Stony Brook, and you've talked over the world. But you're from Strong Island, right? You're from Long Island. You're from middle class white America.
Yeah, I am a Brooklyn boy.
Oh,
I was born in Brooklyn, started my life in Brooklyn, and this was only be of interest to people of a certain age. The day I went to Ebbets Field.
Ooh.
The day the Dodgers announced that they were leaving for LA was the first time I ever saw my father cry. Wow. And he said, "Brooklyn is over." Wait, it gets better. 4 months later, we were living on Long Island.
It had officially ended.
It's over. It was over. And he never watched a baseball game again.
Wow.
Yeah, it broke his heart. And I think, when I tell that story to men in their 80s, 70s, 80s in New York City,
I'm sure they relate.
They completely relate.
They get it.
Yeah.
Brooklyn was over.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to speak there, whether it's the Brooklyn Dodgers or sports or your father, and again, the reason I bring that up is this isn't, you're coming from an outside speaking in. You come from an insider's perspective.
Right.
A lot of this stuff, when it's the gender criticism, whether it's talking about masculinity and its problematic nature, you're coming from a place where this was in your home, in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think that there's two things to that to my identity that's important, because I don't come from a quickly, easily identifiable, marginalized position, which is to say, I'm cisgender, heterosexual, white man, middle class, professional in the United States. I mean, they don't get more privilege than that, right? On the one hand, so my point of entry is as one of the superordinate, not one of the subordinate, and
right.
I think that's important. The second thing, though, is that I think every one of us enters these conversations about inequality from the one place, if there is just one, where we feel marginalized.
Sure. That's very true.
I think our identity is very often where we feel like we don't fit in. So for me, growing up in the 1950s in Brooklyn, in the first generation after the Holocaust, that was my Judaism.
Right.
The butcher on the corner had a tattoo. You know, the guy who delivered our milk had a tattoo.
Right.
And so I feel that that was my point of entry, you know, and I think it's important that we think about that every one of us has a place where we don't feel like we don't fit in. That should be the grounds for our coalitions.
Sure. That should be our input, our root system for empathy.
Right. That's
Like,
right.
I mean, and speaking to that, like in this book, in Angry White Men that we just recently read, you speak about how Oprah and how every one of her first guests or initial guests were like always the victim, and you had to find the victim, and that's kind of what you're speaking to. Everybody speaks from their victim or their place of feeling like the victim.
You know, I don't want to go there so fast, but I think just as a footnote,
Sure.
that's one of the things that resonated so strongly throughout white suburban and rural America about Trump is here is a guy who proclaimed himself to be one of the richest, most powerful, most brilliant, most athletic recently men who's ever lived, and yet he says we're victims. We're victims, and
Sure.
and he captured that sense of victimhood among his base,
Yeah.
Sure.
in a way that nobody was expressing it. You know, and that I mean, if there's a genius to this madness, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect segue actually to this notion that, of aggrieved entitlement, right? It's like there's actually, I wondered if you probably have the better words to describe it, but this notion of there's something that belongs to us that now is being taken away that we have to reclaim by any means necessary. And then that's where the division comes in, and that's where kind of like the divide and conquer of Donald Trump is able to thrive.
So this idea of aggrieved entitlement came from trying to understand the experience, the feelings of America's angry white men, whether it's the angry white boys. I said there's a chapter on school shooters, angry white dads.
Mm-hmm.
There's a chapter on father rights movement. There's a chapter on the men's rights movement. And the last chapter is about neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and white nationalists. And the thing that I think unifies those groups is this sense of what I call aggrieved entitlement. So start with the noun first, the entitlement. That, I think, is a sense that these guys believe that something has been taken from them, something that was rightfully theirs. And here's how. So I have two anecdotes that I can give you an image of this. One is my first encounter with what I came to call angry white men on a TV talk show some years ago with four white men who believed that they were the victims of reverse discrimination in the workplace. Now, what's interesting about this story, in parentheses, I will just say, I don't know if you saw this most recent survey that showed that a higher percentage of white people believe that they have experienced racial discrimination than black people.
Yeah, I saw
pretty,
that.
pretty amazing,
Pretty astounding,
right? So how is this possible that white people think that they've been racially discriminated against? So these four guys all talked about how they were qualified for jobs or promotions. They didn't get it precisely for that. And the reason that this story resonated for me is the title of the show was a quote from one of these men. And the quote was, "A black woman stole my job."
Sure.
And so I said to these guys, look, I have just one question for you. It's about the title. Actually, it's about one word in the title. I want to know about the word "my." Where did you get the idea it's your job, right? That's what aggrieved entitlement sounds like. You have to believe that that is your job. So when you listen to the Tea Party saying we have to take our country back, right? Who's the we in that sentence? Who is the our in that phrase, our country? Because let's face it, unless you are a Native American, every other person came here on a boat, whether they wanted to or not.
Right.
Right? So when we say, so only Native Americans could say that, we
Sure,
should take
absolutely.
our
And
country back, right?
that's not hyperbole. That's not like
No.
exaggeration. That's absolute truth.
No, I often joke that white men in America are the beneficiaries of the greatest affirmative action program ever in the history of the world, which is called the history of the world.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Oh my
So
God.
that's one anecdote that I think captures something. But let me give you an image, Samantha, because I think this is important if you want to develop some kind of empathy or compassion for these men. It's an image that comes from Arlie Hochschild's book Strangers in Their Own Land, which also tries to understand these guys. So imagine you are the guys I talked to. They believed themselves to be fine people, good men. They worked every day. They pay their taxes. They made a bet, and the bet that they made was that they, just like their fathers and grandfathers, if they worked hard, saved their money, they could do two things. They could support a family by themselves. Their wives shouldn't have to work,
Right, yeah.
and they could buy their own house.
Yeah.
Sure.
They've been standing in line, waiting their turn. And now there's all these other people cutting in front of them.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? There's black people, gay people, immigrants, women, all
Sure.
these people cutting in front. So they go to the government and they like tug on the sleeve and they say, hey, this isn't fair. There's all these people cutting in front of us. And the government says, the hell with you.
Yeah.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
So that's why they feel so ripped off, stiffed by the government, because they feel like they've been doing everything. We've done everything you told us.
Yes.
And now we're getting the shaft.
Yeah.
Now, I think they're right. I think they are getting the shaft. I think that white men in America, have been screwed by this system. But do you seriously think it's LGBT people who outsourced your job? Do you seriously think that it is people of color who gave you those predatory loans? Do you seriously think that it's feminist women who organize climate change? Of course not.
Yeah.
So my feeling is they're right to be angry, but they're delivering their mail to the wrong address.
Mm-hmm.
There are rapacious banks and predatory companies all
Sure.
over the place who are ripping them off the same way that people of color are being
I
ripped
know.
off, right?
It's like we're all victims of the same system. So it's like, how can you,
So-
but
So my analysis of this is that Trump has ridden a wave of this kind of aggrieved entitlement.
It's that populist
And
movement. Yeah.
Populism, right?
Yeah.
Right. But populism's an emotion. It's not a theory. It's not
Sure.
an analysis, right?
Sure.
It's a theory. It's a feeling we've been badly done by.
Okay.
There is a populism of the right. Italian fascism, the Tea Party, the Donald Trump guys. That's the populism of the right. That's what it looks like.
Sure.
But, there's also a populism of the left. There's Spanish anarchism. There's Bruce Springsteen, white working class hero, a leftist. So what is the difference between leftist populism and right-wing populism? Race.
Okay.
Right-wing populism says, let's blame them.
Yeah.
And left-wing populism says, let's ally with them in coalition.
Yeah.
Sure.
That is to say, left-wing populism sees class as more important than race.
Yep.
Right-wing populism sees race as more important than class. And to me, to my analysis, that is the story of America. The history of America is the denial of race. Right, the denial of racism.
Sure.
This, to me, that the story of America is that race became a proxy for class. So we didn't have to talk about it.
Denial in that sense is it's a temporary salve. Like if we go back to the origins, as we said earlier, if we deny the genocide of what has happened to the indigenous people or the Native Americans, we can continue surviving, going on with their everyday lives. If we can deny the racism that's happening daily and that has created pedestals for certain persons like white angry men to have their pedestals,
Right.
we can go on with our daily lives.
And we get to feel like we're victims too, so
Sure.
we don't have to listen to you.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
And our
Yeah.
victimhood, because of our sense of entitlement, trumps your
Right.
victimhood, right?
And I think, I have to say, I think in some respects, progressives play into this
Sure.
by creating those hierarchies of oppression that end up that in the guise of enabling some people to speak, silence others. Do you know what I mean? So we on the left are constantly talking about who's more oppressed than whom,
Right.
right?
The
So we're
Olympics,
fighting among
yeah.
ourselves,
Mhm.
right? And I think we play into that hand, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me, I mean, maybe this is going to sound simplistic, but I always thought that just a sort of an offhand comment that Bernice Johnson Reagan made, the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock. She said that you don't go into coalition with people you agree with. You go into coalition with people you don't agree with about all kinds of things. But on this one thing, you agree. That's where you start. We're going to keep those differences right there. We're going to acknowledge them. We're not going to pretend they don't exist. But here's where we agree. Let's start here.
And that's one thing that I want to talk about because in the epilogue of this book, you discuss how in order to separate masculinity from aggrieved entitlement, there has to be a coming together of folks across, because I mean, really, this is a class problem, right? And so, I mean, what does it look like for us to actually come together?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I struggle with is like, okay, reading these. One of the things that I find fascinating about the way that you approach, the way that you talk about the people you're interviewing is like you really paint a picture for who they are and all of that. And I always picture myself. I'm like, as a Black woman, like I would never feel comfortable being able to go up to these people and have the conversations that you're having. And so as we come together as just different sectors, like what could that actually look like?
Well, first of all, I want to say something to you couldn't go up to these guys and have the conversations. What do you think? A Brooklyn Jewish boy is gonna, I mean, come on.
Fair.
I wasn't. I mean, I
Fair.
was. I mean, in fact, sometimes I would open with, like, I am your worst nightmare. I'm a Jewish leftist intellectual sociologist. You're going to talk to me.
Yeah.
But I would also say, and listeners could be, might find this useful also. There's a woman, a friend of mine who's a filmmaker named Dia Khan, Kahn, and she, I think, or Khan, Khan, yes, Dia, Deeyah. She did a documentary about these guys. She started in Charlottesville. And she was interested in the guys who are involved in sort of the alt-right, and she came here to do a documentary. She had done a documentary of ex-jihadists, and she's London-based.
Okay.
And she is Muslim, Iranian, a woman, and she walks right up to these guys and starts talking to them on camera. And they open up to her. They invite her to their camps. She starts talking to them, and it may, for whatever reason, some of them kind of just warmed to her. She's a really lovely, outgoing person. I think one of the older guys kind of had a kind of paternal kind of feeling toward her. But what I'm saying is, you'd be surprised who will open up to you if you approach them and say, I am not judging you.
Yeah.
I'm not here to tell you you're bad or wrong. I'm here to try to understand you. And this is what I said to these guys when I approached them. There is no way I can understand your worldview coming from where I am.
Yeah.
I'm not here to convince you of mine. And I'm not going to be convinced by yours, but I do need to understand it. That's my job as a researcher. I can't understand it just by reading. I got to talk to you guys.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that of those guys, probably half of them said no.
Yep. Okay. Fair. Yeah.
But I got enough to say yes that I felt like I got something that I understood. I came to understand some things about them.
Sure. Well, with what Sam was saying, the ones you were able to speak with, and the ones you're able to have good conversations with and get to understand better, what is the commonality that we could all serve us better to unite? Whether it's to talk about masculinity, whether it's to talk about class, what do those commonalities look like?
Well, I think that we in the progressive side of things often focus rightly on how far we have to go. Right, all the things that are still problems out there, the violence against women, the persistent racism, all of these sorts of things, right? And that's true. But every now and then, it helps if you want to understand where these guys are coming from. It helps to turn around and look at how far we've come and how fast.
Yeah.
These guys grew up thinking that their lives would look like their grandfathers.
Sure.
If they were professionals, that their lives would look like Don Draper's, right? If they weren't professionals, that their lives would look like Andy Griffith's. The idea,
that changed dramatically,
right? So they're sitting there going, "What just happened?"
Yeah.
1 minute we're in Maybury, and the next minute we're talking about transgender bathrooms. Like, where did sure. I don't have the bandwidth to figure this stuff out. So of course, when you get confused, most of us sort of retreat to some place that feels more secure. You step in quicksand, you step out.
Yeah.
So these people feel that the ground underneath them is shifting. Now, you can say, get over it. This is the new reality. And we could say that right here and be fine with that.
But yeah.
But it does but at that moment we lose them.
Mm-hmm.
That at that moment, make America great again means something different to them than it does to us. And that's so to me, I mean, I feel like, yes, it is in most of America, it is bewilderingly fast. And so I think that bewilderment, that distress, that feeling like we don't know the language, the signpost any longer. And this, you don't have to go too far to figure this out. Look at the Golden Globes. None of the men there said a word about Time's Up or Me Too. Not a word. Why? Because they're all scared to death. Why? Not because they're bad, but because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to do something stupid. I actually think that's a good sign.
I agree.
Means that most men don't want to be jerks.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, let's start there.
Yeah. This is like a great thing. So we've been talking about, the notion that, Harvey Weinstein's and Matt Lauer's and all these people have come out, have been kind of persecuted for their actions, right? And for most, rightfully so. And I wonder, there's this notion that there are powerful guys, right? You talk a lot about this in the book. There are powerful guys who have kind of the bandwidth to be able to have that type of power over someone
Have
else.
that kind of tyrannical power almost.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And then there are the regular guys who are like, I'm not powerful. What are you talking about, privilege? I'm not powerful. What are you talking about? I go to work, I'm bossed around by my boss. I come home, I'm bossed around by my wife. I'm bossed around by my daughter. What do you mean power?
Right.
What do you mean? Yeah.
Well, there's two ways I would respond to that, and I think it's important that we pay attention. The celebrities are sort of obviously the most visible platform to talk about the Me Too thing, but I think there's something else in this as well. I think we have to take these men at their word that they don't feel powerful, and that's because in our analysis of patriarchy, we understand that patriarchy is not simply a system by which men dominate women. It's also a system by which some men dominate other men. So those men who don't feel powerful, they're right.
Yep.
But it's not like women have taken over.
Sure.
It's like some men have power over other men. So they do feel that they're powerless. And all of the landscape of masculinity politics, I put that in quotation marks, is basically organized around that experience that men as a group are in power, but men don't feel powerful.
Yeah.
So you have the men's rights guys, who I talk about in the book, who say something like, you know how you don't feel powerful? You're right. Those feminist women, they have all the power now. Let's go get it back. Or you have the mythopoetic guys, the ones who were chanting and drumming in the woods a decade or so ago, and they're saying, how you don't feel powerful? You're right. Let's go to the woods. We'll get do the power rituals, the power chant. Here's the power stick, the power drum. And which struck me as kind of like like the uppies in the 80s wearing power ties and eating power breakfasts, as if power could be a fashion accessory. So my position on that, as somebody who supports gender equality, racial equality, sexual equality, is that the fact that most men don't feel powerful, although men as a group have power over women, is exactly where we have to start.
Yep.
All the power in the world at the aggregate level does not trickle down to individual men feeling powerful. So something is now. Also, women don't feel powerful. They invented this movement called feminism to sort of try to figure that out.
Yeah.
So if once you don't feel powerful, once you acknowledge that, then maybe the way to move is to sort of ally with other groups that don't feel powerful and say, how can we work together? So that's the position that I've taken. So it's not power. I don't see power as a zero-sum game here.
I think one of I feel like that's a perfect parallel to kind of the classism, right? Because it's like we've got a perfect, I want to say hierarchy, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that. We've got a perfect perfect kind of a picture of the way that we've created a class system in which we can fight one another, like the Hunger Games, right? We're fighting one another for this position that we'll never have, while the people at the top get to eat. And this position of agreed entitlement that, in a sense, we're talking about angry white men here, but I could say people who are educated feel. I could say people who come from specific,
I'm an angry brown man.
Yeah, right. You know, like it's like, you know,
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I said, people have asked me about, well, are you angry? And and I was, yeah, of course I am.
yeah.
But I'm not. But I feel like I'm angry about what is also screwing everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
But you don't have to go for as far as the Hunger Games. I just saying this personally, I've always had a very, very uncomfortable and ambivalent relationship to boxing, because I grew up in the era when all of the boxers were African American men fighting each other for white people's amusement, and it just felt too close to 19th century South to me. On the other hand, I think Muhammad Ali was one of the greatest Americans to ever walk on the planet. So I've always had a kind of ambivalent relationship to it, because he was brilliant, and took stands that really cost him. So he's always been somebody who I admired. And yet, and the visceral, I won't deny the sort of the visceral pleasure of the viewing. And on the other hand, the ambivalence of like, oh God, what am I watching here?
Yeah.
And if you don't have an ambivalent relationship to it, you're not thinking hard enough about it.
Yeah.
The complexities of it all.
Yeah.
What's that?
To the complexities of it all and how.
Yeah. Like, who am I, the viewer? Who are they? What's the spectacle?
It's also being kind of okay with the fact that there is going to be that ambivalence, and we don't have to like shy away from it. We can just kind of be in the presence of that, and that's kind of how we're going to be able to coexist on any kind of level, really.
I know it's 2018 in the United States of America, and I know that we have a president who is unable to think beyond. Well, I don't want to say black and white but beyond any kind of the most simplistic kind of us-them models.
Yeah.
But it strikes me as somebody who's a social scientist that the hallmark of adulthood is being able to understand and live with ambivalence, ambiguity. That is the hallmark of adulthood. It's always going to be some shade of gray. Right. And that is important for us to acknowledge, because that's where the excitement is. That's where the interesting thing, what's interesting, I think. That's
great.
I think we have to embrace the ambivalence.
Ambivalence you're talking about is kind of like what we were mentioning earlier about the quicksand. Like a lot of adults, it seems like in this day, as if they find that ambivalence, they retreat to defensiveness and retreat what is stability. Correct. Yeah. So with that in mind. With the previous generation or the working class Joe, the average Joe, the plumber.
Joe the plumber, right.
When he engages with this and he feels uncomfortable and unsure, he retreats back to his safety net. Now, in your kind of in the TED Talk, towards the end, you mentioned the idea of free and freedom. With all that in mind, what do you prescribe Joe the plumber would gain from freedom? Or what does that kind of freedom from masculinity gain Joe the plumber? What does that even look like?
Big question. Yeah. So, I find myself increasingly uncomfortable with the framing of, toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity.
Me too.
So let me tell you what I would say to Joe the plumber, to bring him, because I'm not interested I really am not interested in him becoming more like me. That is, in him embracing my idea of masculinity. So I would say to Joe the plumber what I said to the cadets at West Point when I gave the sexual assault awareness lecture, last October. I said, "What does it mean to be a good? What would it mean to you?"
That's a tough crowd. I
yeah.
feel.
Well, you know what? Your listeners would know I'm pointing to the palm of my hand. Here's why. Because I said to them, "What does it mean to be a good man? A good man. When you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror. What does that mean?" And here's what they said. This is West Point. Honor, integrity, duty, do the right thing, country, stand up for the little guy, protector, provider, responsible. That's what I heard from them. I said, "Okay, where did you learn that?" And they said, "I learned it everywhere. It's our culture. It's the Judeo-Christian heritage. It's everything." I said, "That's great." Now, I would say in parentheses to you, they've described what it means to be a good person.
Right.
However, they experience that as very gendered. They experience that as what it means to be a good man. So I'll sit with that with them. Now I ask them, okay, you tell me if those same ideas come into your mind now when I say, "Man the F up." Be a real man.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, no, that's different. Being a real man is like strong, tough, powerful, never suck it up, play through pain, never give an inch, win at all costs, get rich, get laid. I said, okay, where'd you learn that? And they said, my father, my coach, my guy friends, my older brother.
Wow.
So there's three things I want to take from this. Number one, what we learned from them is that masculinity, being a real man, is a performance, and it's judged by other men. Number two, what I know is that every man listening to this podcast, every man I've ever met, will at some point be asked to betray his own values, his own ethics, in order to be a real man in the eyes of other men. He will be asked to not say something. He will be asked to pretend he doesn't see what he sees, that he doesn't know what he knows, that he didn't walk out of a meeting in which the president said something disgustingly racist and say, oh, I must have been checking my messages at that moment. I didn't hear it.
I don't recall.
Right, I don't recall. I mean, so my feeling is that, and so what I would say to Joe the plumber, this is the third thing, is I would say, I do not want you to live up to my ideas of masculinity. I want you to live up to yours. I want you to, what can I do to support you so that you can live up to your ideals about what it means to be a good man? How do I support you so that I can run interference for you with other men who might say that you're not a real man, whatever? You see what I'm saying? So I feel like that framing helps me to speak to somebody like that.
No, absolutely. And it's about, we've talked about this in previous episodes in the last season about how a lot of this, especially masculinity, whether you want to call it toxic or whatever, any sort of masculinity is a performance.
Yep.
And whether we know it or not, a lot of us feel this conscionable drive to perform it regularly, especially maybe only when we're around other men.
That's right.
And meeting some sort of benchmark or standard of what it means to be a man. And if we fall short of that, the guilt that we feel and the oppression that we are worried about.
Exactly.
And so it's really poignant that you say that, because I would have never thought that. The goal being, the freedom being for men is to be free to be yourself and not perform any sort of level of masculinity for anybody else.
Right.
But
that's
to be,
right. That's what freedom really means.
To be in tune,
be more authentically yourself.
Sure.
Right.
No, that's very poignant. And
and the performance part. So on the one hand, as you describe it, it's an opportunity, and the other way, I think, it's a responsibility, because that performance aspect. If Billy Bush had said to Donald Trump, that is disgusting,
right,
not to mention illegal. If we withdraw our real man tacit support, it stops.
I want to add one thing to that, because one thing that you pointed to about, I mean, I think the mask of masculinity, right, is why we're all here, basically everything that you just said. And I want to say that there is a performance, I think, in spaces with women as well, where women have to perform the mask of femininity in a way that I feel, being like doing this podcast and doing all this research has made me more conscious of the way that I have to perform femininity, the way that I see other women perform femininity for our benefit or for the benefit of other women and the benefit of men as well. So,
and if patriarchy works, the male gaze determines your performance of femininity, so you're not free either. Exactly your point. You can't be authentically yourself because you have to constantly check your look in the mirror to see how other people are perceiving you.
You know, you have your new book coming out, Healing from Hate.
This has been a great conversation.
I know. I mean, I have so much more
to
talk to you about, but so this new book, Healing from Hate, I have a weird obsession with like supremacy, and I feel like your work has really helped me to kind of like feed that.
Let me say something about it, because at the end of Angry White Men, I was really feeling kind of depressed, and then I was trying to feel optimistic by saying to myself, but I was trying to feel like okay, my prediction, which I still sort of believe, but it's going to be a little bit longer than I thought, was that these kind of angry white men, they are going to become decreasingly numerous, but increasingly loud on the internet. Well, maybe that's true, but it's going to take a while longer.
Yeah.
So the new book is called Healing from Hate, and it's about how young men get into and get out of the violent extremist movements. I looked at 4 organizations that help them get out. One in Sweden called Exit, one in Germany also called Exit. and one in the U.S. that's only a few years old called Life After Hate, and then another group in London called Quilliam, which works with ex-jihadists to help them get out of the Islamist movement. So I have 3 groups of ex-neo-Nazi white supremacist skinheads and one group of ex-jihadists, kind of to see what was similar and what was different. And I have to say, it will strike you as ironic that this book about these guys who, had swastika tattoos on their necks, who participated in neo-Nazi skinhead rallies. This is the most optimistic book I've ever written because it's about the hope that they can get out. If they get the right kind of support, if they have the right kind of organizations that can help them, they can get out. They can heal from this.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys have suffered massive trauma. Many of them were abused as children. Many of them had, childhood issues, were bullied, whatever. And then many of them went on to commit unspeakable acts of violence themselves, were in prison. And yet they're whole today. They've healed from that in ways that enable them to go out and try to help others heal. What could be more hopeful than that?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what the book is about. Is about those 4 cases: the U.S., Sweden, Germany, and England. And there's a profile of one of the members of each of these groups that begins it. And the good news for you all is that we're having an event to launch the book on February 27th here in New York City at Fordham Law School at 7:00. And I will talk about the book. There's a film being made by a filmmaker about some of these guys that will show.
Very cool.
That before it premieres at Tribeca. And we're having a panel of 3 formers.
Wow, that's really cool.
2 guys who are in Life After Hate, and then the guy who's the head of Exit in Sweden, which is the sort of the prototype of how to do this right, and then a couple of researchers as well. So it's going to be, so these guys will actually speak about their experiences as well. So it's going to be a really amazing event.
Well, I was going to tell our listeners, me and Samantha are going to be there, so you should come. But now that we've heard that, don't come for us at all.
No, please
don't even worry
for
about
us.
us.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, this is super exciting. I think one of the things that I want to say before we close out is I came here expecting, you're like the godfather of masculinity studies. I was like, please just tell us what to do. Like, what is the solution? How can we end this, these toxic ways of beings around masculinity? Really what I got today was the comfortability with ambivalence is really the only thing that we can do.
But I want to say one thing, and I'm not pushing back against what you just said, Samantha, but I want to underscore it. When you say tell us what to do, the answers to our dilemmas right now are not going to come from cisgender straight white men. What cisgender straight white men can be doing is listening.
Okay.
You're going to tell us what to do. We've been telling you what to do for a very long time, and we have fucked this up royally.
Fair.
So my feeling is that this is I'm thinking about the Me Too moment also. What do men have to do around this? Listen to what women are saying with an open heart to realize the kind of pain and that they have suffered, the kind of anguish, the kind of career-altering experiences that they had doing this. To just let women talk for a moment. I would say the same thing to my white brothers and sisters about this. We've got to hear what this still feels like. We cannot tell them that, that taking a knee, that's it's not the right time. Or, it's not the right time to talk about gun control after a mass shooting. And I feel like, okay, I have my calendar out. Could you tell me when the right time might be? So I feel like, men who are listening, it's time for us to be listening. It's time for us to listen with an open heart, not defensively, because we know that this alliance between women and men is vital to everybody's future.
We're done with the season. Season 2 just began and ended. We're cool.
We don't have anything else to say.
No.
Thank you, Dr. Kimmel. That was really incredible. Thank you for speaking with us about the book. We're excited about the new book, and we're excited about the event. Again, it's February 27th.
27th at Fordham Law School.
Yes. We'll post it on the Facebook.
Great. Do that.
Yes, this has been Masculinity. This is a tremendous way to start the new year, and
we got incredible episodes coming up, and a swath of really cool guests coming through, a diverse amount of guests. Not as great as Dr. Kimmel.
I feel, you do.
We're really excited about it. I hope you guys can listen. You can follow us on the
Twitter at Masculinity Pod.
On
On Facebook, Masculinity Podcast, always with a K.
We got some really cool messaging from people throughout the off season. So if you want to send us a message,
yes,
please do.
I will be responding. I have not been super horrible at coaching people about how to talk to masculinity about their folks. So feel free to email us at all platforms.
So we appreciate you guys listening.
Yeah. And masculinitypodcast@whoistheo.com is our email. So feel free to hit us up on that as well. My name is Samantha and Zessie.
My name is Remoy George Philip the First.
And this has been Masculinity. Thank you so much for listening.
Shout out to Pretty Chris on the ones and twos.